This scene is familiar to anyone who has ever stood in line to board a flight. The glossy sheen of the floors, endless rows of seats by panoramic windows, the monotonous, soothing hum of announcements. We are sold the idea of a comfortable transit, a temporary stop, a safe haven before taking to the skies. It seems like just a big building with a strict schedule, but glass and plastic can lie. If you turn off the background music and listen to the vibration of the floor, you can feel the earth trembling.
Behind the sterile facade lies not a service, but an industrial conveyor belt operating on the verge of physical breakdown.
Overheated bearings on the underground baggage carousels, asphalt melting beneath 300-ton landing gear, dispatchers suffering from chronic sleep deprivation, hidden micro cracks in the steel supports of the concourses, the smell of burnt jet fuel, deeply ingrained in the ventilation system. This is not a transportation hub, it is a giant centrifuge, a closed system, an insatiable body, whose sole purpose is to process the human mass, not allowing it to stop for even a second. By the end of this story, it will become clear why this system is doomed to eternal expansion.
You will understand why comfort here is merely an optical illusion, and what will actually happen if this conveyor belt stops for even an hour.
But to grasp the scale of this trap, we must go back to the starting point, to a time when there were no radars, no concrete, no global logistics, only red dust, silence, and wasteland. Geography always dictates its own terms. At the beginning of the 20th century, Atlanta was a city without a future. It had absolutely no natural access to the sea. There were no major navigable rivers nearby to support trade. It was literally suffocating in its deep continental isolation. The city remained merely a major inland railway hub in the south of the country. But the old railroads could no longer provide the city with the economic boost it needed. The only ocean accessible to the city turned out to be the sky. The development of aviation became a real lifeline for the local residents. It was the boundless airspace that offered hope for a connection with the rest of the world. In 1925, the city authorities made a decision born of desperation. They leased an old, long-abandoned auto racetrack on the outskirts.
It was 300 acres of hard Georgia red clay on the site of former agricultural plantations.
It was not an airport in the sense we are used to. It was simply a huge, dirty, and dusty open-air pit. Nature actively resisted any human attempts to use this unyielding land for flying. The field instantly turned into an impassable, sticky swamp after every heavy rain. Water pooled into huge puddles that wouldn't dry up for weeks. Heavy wooden biplanes delivering mail would get stuck in this mud up to their axles. In those days, pilots navigated not by precise instruments but by the smoke from campfires. Car headlights, which locals thoughtfully turned on at the edges of the field in the fog, also served as a lifeline. The entire system relied solely on sheer luck and keen human eyesight. But the city's growing ambitions demanded a substantial physical reality. The city needed living passengers, not just bags of paper letters. The air harbor was to become the calling card of your pre-developing region. To attract major airlines, the ground had to be securely stabilized. The authorities faced the task of literally wresting this territory from capricious nature. The soft soil demanded urgent and quite radical intervention by builders. In the late 1920s, they began actively filling the field with slag and fine gravel. This was the first, very primitive attempt to stabilize the soft surface. Huge, heavy rollers compacted the unyielding soil all day long. Workers tried to create a solid, artificial surface where the earth was accustomed to breathing in moisture. The battle against the mud demanded enormous physical effort from hundreds of builders.
But this grueling labor quickly bore its first long-awaited fruits.
Soon, the first passenger terminal appeared at the edge of the field. It was a very small wooden building, more like a bus stop in the countryside. It had absolutely no waiting areas or strict security checks. Inside, there were only simple luggage scales and a wooden check-in counter. This naive system worked reliably because the workload was negligible. The airport handled only about a dozen small flights a day. The fragile mechanism easily handled its tasks because its weight had not yet pressed down on the ground with full force. World War II forever changed the physical nature of this space. A massive army urgently needed sturdy concrete infrastructure for heavy strategic bombers. Military engineers arrived in Atlanta with confidence, armed with massive federal budgets and cutting-edge technology. The face of the old postal airport began to change almost beyond recognition. Large-scale work was carried out around the clock to meet the needs of the front lines. The red Georgia clay was buried once and for all under stone. Hundreds of thousands of tons of hot asphalt and strong Portland cement quickly took its place. Military builders securely paved the field with an incredibly hard shell. They drew long, straight lines for the first real runways.
Now the ground could easily withstand the regular landings of massive, multi-ton aircraft.
When the devastating war finally ended, the city received this valuable industrial gift. The military left, leaving behind a perfect transportation infrastructure. The golden age of mass propeller-driven commercial aviation began immediately. Officials and city residents developed a persistent illusion that the system had reached its ideal state. Local authorities sincerely believed that the renovated airport was ready for any future challenges. In 1948, the new passenger terminal was officially opened. City officials were incredibly proud of this grand architectural structure. It was a very massive and beautiful brick building of classical proportions. The new complex was specifically designed for wealthy people who were in no hurry. The utmost comfort and luxury were prioritized when serving affluent clients.
The architecture of that time took absolutely no account of the future incredible massification of air travel.
Flying on a passenger plane was still an extremely rare and very elite event. People would come to the airport on weekends just to dine in a luxurious restaurant overlooking the tarmac. The building functioned as an expensive social theater, where gleaming airplanes were merely beautiful backdrops. But this elegant brick shell already concealed a fatal mathematical error. The massive building had been short-sightedly designed to accommodate only linear growth in passenger traffic. None of the terminal's designers even imagined that the growth would turn out to be explosive and exponential. By the mid-1950s, the situation began to spiral rapidly out of control. Passenger traffic began to double steadily every few years. Airlines began actively using new, spacious aircraft and significantly lowered ticket prices. The luxurious halls of polished wood and brass were flooded with the masses of the middle class. The terminal's old, narrow doors simply couldn't handle such a dense flow of people. The spacious parking lot in front of the beautiful building quickly turned into a chaotic scrapyard. Passengers were forced to park their cars right on the lawns due to a severe shortage of spaces. Airplanes lined up for hours in a long queue on the concrete taxiways. They idled, wasting incredibly expensive jet fuel, waiting for a spot at the overcrowded apron. The building, designed for comfort, began to suffocate its visitors. For the first time, the system sensed that its form did not match its function. The real crisis began with the advent of jet engines. In the early 1960s, the first giant Boeing 707s arrived in Atlanta. The arrival of these aircraft forever changed the rules of civil aviation. They brought with them three factors that were devastating for the infrastructure: incredible weight, extreme heat, and deafening noise. The old airport was completely unprepared for such a severe test of endurance. The weight of the new aircraft had nearly tripled compared to its propeller-driven predecessors. The old military concrete was designed exclusively for light aircraft. Under the immense weight, it began to crack rapidly and crumble into small pieces.
Under the heavy landing gear of jetliners, ordinary asphalt was literally being crushed.
Deep, dangerous ruts began to form on the runways. Engineers had to constantly patch holes in the pavement to avoid terrible accidents. Exhaust gases, reaching temperatures of hundreds of degrees, literally melted the bright lane markings. The roaring sonic boom from the powerful turbines shattered the fragile windows in homes near the airport. Local residents flooded the city administration with thousands of angry complaints about the constant noise. The jet age demanded a completely new infrastructure. A routine facelift could no longer save the situation. Large-scale and costly renovations of the entire passenger complex were required. In 1961, the renovated terminal with so-called piers opened. Long and very narrow corridors extended from the main building directly onto the open airfield. It was a desperate attempt to artificially stretch the transportation system. The architects wanted to maximize the usable contact area between the building and the new large aircraft. However, this hasty decision created a completely new form of suffering for people. Passengers had to walk several grueling kilometers. They moved slowly through these cramped, narrow passages, heavy suitcases in hand. The situation was greatly exacerbated by the complete lack of proper air conditioning systems. During the hot summer months, temperatures inside these terminals easily reached 40 degrees. People regularly fainted right on their way to their long-awaited flight.
The building turned into a veritable sweltering sauna for tens of thousands of travelers.
Then, transportation logistics took a historic and fateful turn. The major airline Delta introduced a revolutionary business model called the hub-and-spoke system. This ingenious concept forever changed the principles of passenger transportation across the country. Atlanta instantly became the main hub for a vast number of routes. Planes from dozens of different cities no longer flew directly to one another. They flocked en masse to Atlanta from all corners of the United States. There, they quickly exchanged transfer passengers. After this brief procedure, the planes flew back to their scheduled destinations. It was a truly brilliant financial decision for the airline's business. The company was able to incredibly optimize its daily expenses and increase its net profit. But this same business plan became a real physical curse for the old building. The outdated architecture simply wasn't ready for such drastic changes. Now the airport had to do more than just monotonously send people on vacation. It had to accumulate them en masse inside a relatively small terminal. The complex's tasks now included shuffling and redistributing crowds within the shortest possible timeframes. The transportation system quickly turned into a giant round-the-clock sorting center for living biomass. The number of transit passengers far exceeded the number of those for whom Atlanta was the final destination. The fragile building was literally suffocating under such an incredible influx of customers. Exhausted people sat right on the dirty floor, waiting for their connecting flights. Many simply slept on the stopped baggage carousels due to severe physical exhaustion. The old city sewer system was completely unable to handle such a massive volume of dirty water and waste. By 1975, one thing had become crystal clear to the city leaders. The old concrete structure was no longer capable of any economically viable repairs. Any superficial modernization only prolonged the complex's death throes. What was needed was the complete and surgical demolition of the entire old complex. The city vitally needed an airport of an entirely new format and scale. The authorities began actively preparing for the most ambitious construction project in their rich history. Mayor Maynard Jackson made an incredibly bold and risky decision. The scale of this ingenious plan bordered on outright managerial madness. He firmly ordered the construction of a completely new, massive airport. Construction was to take place right in the middle of an operational aviation hub. At the same time, the mayor strictly forbade the suspension or cancellation of even a single commercial flight. Heavy construction work began in full swing amid continuous round-the-clock air traffic. The new infrastructure complex was set to become the largest construction site in the entire southern part of the country. The engineers' main task was to completely overhaul the philosophy of traffic flow. The specialists resolutely rejected the outdated idea of a single terminal in the form of a luxurious palace. From the very beginning, they designed a ruthless and highly efficient transport machine. Classical aesthetics immediately took a back seat, giving way to bare pragmatism. This is how the unique architectural concept of completely parallel concourses emerged. The builders erected 6 massive rectangular islands made of durable concrete and steel. They were arranged with extreme precision in a single, perfect geometric row. Wide, straight concrete canyons ran between these islands to provide safe parking for the aircraft. Each aircraft no longer had to maneuver for long periods in cramped, dead-end pockets. The pilots simply moved in a straight line to their designated gate. There, they quickly unloaded the cargo and let the tired passengers off. Then the crew would pick up new transit passengers and immediately take off. Rigorous transportation logistics had definitively and unconditionally triumphed over classical architecture. The capacity of this air hub had increased several-fold at once. But how to move tens of thousands of people between these islands, separated by hundreds of meters of concrete and roaring turbines? Letting crowds of passengers walk across the active airfield was strictly forbidden. Building overpasses proved too expensive and very inconvenient for tall aircraft. To maintain high passenger throughput, it was decided to route the flow deep underground. Hidden work began right beneath the active runways. A wide transport tunnel was dug beneath layers of reinforced concrete weighing many tons. It was a major transit artery, reliably connecting all 6 concourses. A unique automated system of modern underground trains was launched there. These high-speed electric trains had absolutely no human drivers. The cars moved precisely according to a strict schedule under the careful control of smart electronics. In this long underground passage, there were no familiar windows or natural daylight. A weary passenger simply descended a long escalator into a humming concrete tube. There, they boarded a cool steel car of a high-tech electric train. A few minutes later, the system ruthlessly disgorged them onto the correct platform. Travel had become a completely predictable and incredibly fast process for everyone. The new, massive airport was officially opened in 1980. Its colossal scale truly amazed the imagination of its very first visitors. People were greeted by incredibly spacious halls, strict symmetry, and cold mathematical precision. Everyone felt that the age-old problem of a lack of space had finally been solved once and for all. The designers confidently declared the enormous safety margin of this monolithic structure. They sincerely believed that the system's capacity would last for at least half a century. The architects expected to rest on their laurels for many decades and not have to think about renovations at all. But the growth in passenger traffic turned out to be much faster than even their most optimistic projections. They were off by 15 years. Every solution to a problem creates a new shortage. By increasing the building's capacity, the engineers turned it into a veritable black hole. This vortex began rapidly sucking in new flights from across the country. What was intended as excess space was instantly filled by airlines. Atlanta became the world's busiest airport, a title that sounds like a victory. but in practice feels like a daily war of attrition. The complex's staff is forced to work around the clock at the limits of their human capacity. Every new day challenges the strength of the concrete structures and the nerves of the dispatchers. Pride in leadership mixes with fear of an impending transportation collapse. The concrete tube of the underground train began operating at the limits of physics. Cars ran every 100 seconds without a single break. Rubber tires wore down against the concrete track, filling the tunnel with fine, toxic dust. Mechanics had to use powerful ventilation systems just to clear the air in these gloomy underground passages. If even a single sensor on the train doors malfunctioned, the train stopped immediately. Strict safety protocols did not allow for even the slightest risk to passengers' lives. A 2-minute stop meant a crowd of thousands on the platform. A 10-minute stop caused a cascading collapse throughout the entire airport. The chain reaction of inevitable delays quickly disrupted the strict flight schedule across the country. People couldn't get to the islands. Planes couldn't take off, sitting idle at the gates. A system hanging by a single thin underground thread revealed its fragility. By the mid-1990s, in the run-up to the 1996 Olympic Games, the airport faced a crisis for which it was unprepared. The scale of this massive sporting event exceeded even the boldest predictions. Millions of foreign visitors flooded through customs areas designed exclusively for domestic flights. Border control officers were physically unable to handle such a flood of visas and passports. The baggage system, consisting of dozens of kilometers of Kevlar belts, began to chew through the bags. Suitcases containing sports equipment got hopelessly stuck and completely jammed the machinery. The motors of the multi-kilometer-long conveyor belts were critically overheating. Mechanics worked around the clock, patching torn belts in cramped, stuffy basements. This incredibly hard and dirty work took place right under the feet of thousands of exhausted tourists. After the games ended, engineers analyzed the performance of all the components of this colossus. It became clear that the bottleneck was no longer the building itself. The bottleneck had become the sky itself. The airspace above the vast southern metropolis had turned into an overloaded intersection. The 4 operational runways could not handle the volume of aircraft. Air traffic controllers struggled to find available slots for the safe landing of arriving planes. During rush hour, dozens of airliners hung in the air, burning fuel in holding patterns, waiting for their turn to touch down. Exhausted pilots circled endlessly high in the clouds. The economic losses from the kerosene burned were calculated in enormous sums every month. The system urgently required a 5th runway, but there was no more room on the ground. To the south, the airport grounds ran up against an insurmountable barrier. The complex found itself firmly trapped in the tight grip of the surrounding urban environment. There were densely populated residential areas, old cemeteries, and Interstate 285, an 8-lane river of asphalt along which hundreds of thousands of cars raced every day. It reliably connected entire states and ensured uninterrupted trade throughout the region. Anywhere else in the world, this would have been the final limit, an acknowledgement that the city had stopped the car. Engineers would have had to look for alternative and longer routes far beyond the capital. But not here. The pressure from big business and logistics was too great. The airport brought in huge amounts of money for the state's economy, so its further expansion was an absolute priority. After lengthy debates, the authorities decided to remove the barrier. To make way for the massive construction of a new runway, they took the most radical measures in the city's history. Cold pragmatism completely overpowered any sentimental feelings among the citizens. They demolished thousands of homes. Builders uprooted centuries-old trees and razed entire residential neighborhoods to the ground. They relocated a historic cemetery, exhuming the remains, because the dead mustn't obstruct traffic. But they couldn't close the main highway. Stopping traffic on the transit route would have caused an inevitable economic collapse of the entire state of Georgia. And so the most brutal engineering decision in the hub's history was made. They decided to build a runway directly over the existing highway. It wasn't just a pretty car bridge or a regular overpass. It was an unprecedented mega structure, a concrete slab several meters thick, designed to withstand the impact of a 400-ton Boeing 747 falling from the sky, while ordinary drivers traveled beneath it at 100 kilometers per hour. The slightest error in the engineers' calculations when designing this roof could have led to a terrible tragedy. The construction project turned into a real logistical nightmare. 20 million cubic meters of soil were needed to create the proper artificial embankment. Long lines of heavy dump trucks hauled this soil to the construction site around the clock. This mass was so heavy that it physically crushed the underlying geological strata. The builders had to improvise new, complex methods on the fly to stabilize this gigantic mountain of sand. The arduous battle against the laws of physics lasted for several years in a row. The new runway, opened in 2006, cost $1 billion. These colossal financial expenditures immediately proved their utmost effectiveness for business. It permanently solved the agonizing problem of endless traffic jams in the air. Airplanes no longer circled for hours in the sky, but the price of this salvation turned out to be structural. The airport ceased to be an organic and proportionate part of the natural urban landscape. It became a man-made monster, an artificial mountain of concrete looming over the city and overwhelming it with its sheer scale.
Easy now, bring it down slow. Watch the clearance on the far side.
While engineers were successfully solving the transportation problem high in the sky, a catastrophe unfolded on the ground. The tragic events of September 11, 2001, forever destroyed the very essence of familiar movement. Before that terrible day, the Hartsfield-Jackson Airport complex had been designed for a single purpose. That primary purpose was the rapid and uninterrupted transit of massive flows of people. The vector of human movement was always directed strictly forward and never interrupted. People moved swiftly from the main entrance to the check-in counter, from the counter to the gate, and from the gate straight into the aircraft cabin. The terrorist attack instantly introduced a destructive virus of stagnation into this well-oiled transportation system. A previously unseen physical friction emerged, which abruptly halted the living flow. Suddenly, cumbersome and slow security checkpoints of the new security service sprang up in the spacious corridors. Construction crews had to urgently install heavy metal detector frames and massive body scanners. Kilometers of cables and endless plastic trays for outerwear and shoes appeared everywhere. The space, which was supposed to move people through without the slightest delay, turned into a gigantic, rigid filter. Something appeared in the terminals that the transportation system was physically unable to handle. It was a massive, tightly packed crowd of anxious and late passengers. The main terminal building was never designed to hold passengers in one place for long periods. It was designed exclusively for their constant and smooth flow through the halls. Now tens of thousands of bewildered travelers were simultaneously crowding into the vast central atrium. The heat from their bodies began to critically overload the old air conditioning systems. The powerful ventilation system, designed by engineers back in the distant 1980s, was completely unable to cope with the high concentration of carbon dioxide. People stood for hours in endless, serpentine lines, waiting their turn for security screening. The general tension in the dense crowd grew with every minute of waiting. The bright architecture, originally intended to calm passengers before their flight, now seemed to them like a suffocating trap. The once comfortable and wide passageways instantly became dangerous hotspots of aggression and outright panic. Engineers desperately tried to adapt the old terminals to the new, harsh security realities. They ruthlessly tore down interior walls and removed profitable souvenir shops. All of this was done solely to free up additional square footage for the ever-growing lines. But this was merely a mild and very short-lived painkiller for a gravely ill architectural organism. The mandatory security process has forever become the main bottleneck of the entire airport. This strict filter slowed the pulse of the massive machine, forcing it to operate with constant arrhythmia. The system saved the safety of the skies, but irrevocably sacrificed the elegant integrity of the flow on the ground. Today, Hartsfield-Jackson is a veritable sovereign state within a state. An incredible 110 million passengers pass through its spacious terminals every year. This colossal number equals the population of a very large European country. And this entire massive crowd of people rushes through a few square kilometers of cold concrete. But the main intriguing mystery of this amazing place is hidden not at all in the tight flight schedule. It lies in those invisible specialists who service this gigantic centrifuge every day. Here, around the clock and without interruption, about 100,000 employees from various services and companies work. It is a real, fully fledged city with its own strict rules and complex hierarchy. But it is a very strange metropolis with absolutely no permanent residents. It has no cozy residential buildings, no quiet schools, and no green parks for relaxation. Here, dry pragmatism and strict transportation functions reign supreme. Every night, when the flow of tired passengers drops to a minimum, a survival phase hidden from prying eyes begins. The huge airport never actually sleeps or falls silent for even a second. In pitch darkness, it simply switches to another, extremely intensive mode of resource consumption. At exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, teams of professional welders appear in the long underground tunnels. They rush to replace the steel rails of the automated train, which have snapped from the metal's extreme fatigue. These workers have exactly 200 minutes until the system's first morning launch. If they are even slightly late, the early morning for thousands of people will begin with total transportation chaos. At the very same time, special heavy-duty machines roll out onto the dark airfield. Under immense water pressure, they scrape thick black marks from airplane tires off the durable concrete. This burnt rubber fuses tightly to the runway surface over the course of a day after thousands of hard landings by heavy airliners. If this dangerous layer isn't regularly scraped away, the runway will quickly become as slippery as winter ice. And deep in the basements, amid the deafening roar of the engines of the endless baggage system, weary technicians are hard at work. They deftly replace completely worn-out gears and torn conveyor belts. The air in these underground labyrinths is thick with the acrid smell of machine oil and hot, burnt rubber. All this nighttime work is far from mere routine maintenance of an old building. It is a genuine emergency resuscitation of an extremely worn-out and ailing organism. This gigantic mechanism must start beating smoothly and confidently again by 5 o'clock in the early morning. Chronic physical fatigue of the materials has been accumulating for decades in the very load-bearing structure of the complex. The thick concrete on the runways also has its breaking point. The surface is severely affected by so-called alkali-silica reaction. This is a slow chemical reaction that mercilessly destroys the durable stone from the inside out. This occurs due to constant winter contact with corrosive de-icing fluids. The airport's complex power supply system consumes as much electricity as a major industrial metropolis. A single major failure at the main power substation could instantly paralyze the operations of half the airlines in this vast country. This incredible machine is miraculously operating at the absolute limit of its physical capacity. It is held together by sturdy steel ties, constant overnight repairs, and annual financial injections worth billions. This massive transportation machine has become too big to allow it to stop even for a second. And it has become too complex for a single person to control. Look once more at this facade in the rays of the setting sun, at the tails of the planes lined up at the gates with mathematical precision, at the calm light of the panoramic windows. You are not seeing a terminal. You are seeing a mask stretched over a roaring engine. 100 years on, not a single grain of sand remains of Candler Field's red clay. The airport devoured the landscape, swallowed the surrounding neighborhoods, and subjugated the state's economy. Hartsfield-Jackson is a story of how the thirst for movement takes space hostage. This system has no ultimate goal. Its function is the very process of reeling in kilometers, tons, and lives. We have created an instrument of absolute logistical power, capable of moving 100,000 people a day. But the price of this miracle is life within a mechanism that ceaselessly destroys itself under its own weight. As long as trains race through underground tunnels, as long as turbines tear through the air above the highway, as long as the lights burn on the fifth lane, the machine is alive. But this rhythm is no longer a sign of health. It is the pulse of a system that has no right to sleep, because its stoppage would mean the end. The illusion of flight continues, standing on solid concrete.